The artillery barrage began at dawn, and fierce fighting around the strategic Black Sea city of Mykolaiv has been continuing throughout the day. The region's administrator claimed their forces had managed to drive out the Russians once again, declaring that they were retreating and running away. The city, home to around 500,000 people, has become a key target in the embattled Ukrainian south. The Russians are now in control of Kherson and are pushing west, where there is a battle raging for control of Mykolaiv, with Odesa also in their sights. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in central Mykolaiv and joins us now. Lindsay.
Matt, the governor has just announced 8 Ukrainian soldiers killed in that artillery attack last night. Another 8 are missing and 19 were wounded. We also understand that 1 civilian was killed, because it wasn't just a barracks that was hit, although that was where most of the dead were, but also a residential area. And today there's been a battle raging for the airport. You can see how important this city has become. We've been talking about Odesa, which is where I was until today, but they can't attack Odesa until they've got Mykolaiv. It's incredibly important. There are 3 shipyards here. It's a center for the military, and it's also got a major bridge across a river. And that is why the Russians are so determined to take this city. But it is extraordinary that although they have the firepower, they are, at the moment, it is a bit cat and mouse. There was some footage released today which showed multiple rocket launchers. Now, these are Russian Pantsir multiple rocket launchers, which the Ukrainians apparently have seized. Now, the Ukrainians, when they seize the Russian weaponry, they quite often do know how to use it, because, of course, some of this stuff is Soviet era, or it's, you know, the latest version of Soviet era, and they were all trained on the same systems. But for the people of Mykolaiv, of course, it's quite different, and they had an absolutely terrifying night. The Russians attacked Mykolaiv in the darkness before dawn. At first light, it became clear that at least 1 residential block had been hit. 1 person was killed. We set off from Odesa to the west, driving past all those escaping in the other direction. From the western shore of the River Bug, we could see that something had been hit. No one knew what it was. But we could hear the sound of outgoing artillery. Local sources told us there was fighting at the airport to the north of the city, upriver. Across the morning sky, all the swans were leaving. People were keen to tell us what they thought about the Russian soldiers fighting on Ukrainian land.
Мы не сдадимся. Я буду сама своими голыми руками их давить. Просто-напросто. Мне просто жалко их матерей, которые не понимают, что там происходит. Все. Что можно сказать?
Если он сдастся и уйдет, я его отпущу. Не только руки не поднял, мы всех будем крошить. Мы всех здесь порежем. Тот, кто с оружием, это наш враг. Россия, русские люди, это наши братья, да. Они не понимают, они зомби, они вообще ничего не понимают, что у нас тут творится.
It's not a Russian bear guarding the bridge, of course, under the ubiquitous sign saying Russian ship F off, the meme of this war. We waited for several hours before they allowed traffic to cross into the city, past signs of happier times when Mykolaiv was a resort and shipbuilding centre, somewhere you might visit for pleasure. On the other side, in the relative quiet of the day, people felt safe enough to venture out, to go for a bike ride, or take the dog for a walk, to check their city is more or less intact. But last night's artillery fire was the worst yet.
Oh, it's very terrible. I'm see when
Explosions?
bomb. Yes. I'm very scared, but I'm stand. You
want to stay?
I want to stay, and I want to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine is very, very good. Putin. Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, the old nationalist slogan now on everyone's lips, as the people of Mykolaiv wait to see what horror awaits them when darkness falls.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. There is, it seems, no escape for the civilians caught up in the ferocity of this war. Attempts to set up a humanitarian corridor to evacuate people trapped in cities like Mariupol and Kharkiv are constantly frustrated, leaving them stuck in their basements and their cellars without communication and power supplies, perilously short of food and water. Many of those who have managed to escape have headed west to this city of Lviv. Today, the mayor said that around 50,000 displaced people are arriving every single day and that the city was now at breaking point. And I should warn you, there are some distressing images in this report. Lviv has become a city of desperate queues. This was the queue for the train to Poland. This was the queue for the bus. Others were prepared to make the journey on foot. But train is the preferred mode of transport for these huddled masses. From every corner of this country, where Russians have turned their homes into a living hell. And this is just a tiny portion of the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. 1.7 million people and counting, and that's just in 12 days of war. It's -5, and these people have been waiting here for 5 or 6 hours, and that's just the beginning of their day. They're going to have to spend the rest of the day in this queue if they can get on a train at all. They've been traveling for days, if not weeks, leaving their homes behind, and this is just the start of their odyssey. They have no idea what the future holds for them.
We go nowhere. I hope that it will end very, very soon.
You hope so?
Yes.
What have you left behind?
My husband's there, and
He's fighting.
yes, and my family also.
You've left your entire existence, huh? Everything.
Yes, everything. Yes, only this.
This is all you've got now.
Yeah. Yes.
What is your future?
I think I just cannot say what will be in the future. I want to live a moment right now because it's hard to imagine what will come next.
What's your dream? What would you like to do?
I had many dreams in my life, but my biggest dream is to become a detective.
A detective?
Yeah.
An estimated 1/3 of the refugees are children. Too busy trying to keep warm or distracted, to focus on the dreams that have been lost, or just oblivious to the new normal, the one that makes their parents stare into the middle distance of despair. Then suddenly a moment of muffled excitement. The queue advances by a foot. But Ludmila, 83, is convinced that she and her belongings won't make it. There will be a train. There will be a train.
Буде потяг.
There will be a train today. Yeah.
Буде сьогодні потяг, буде.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be
А
a
ви
train.
в Польщу їдете, так?
Officially, this is not a refugee camp, but it's beginning to look like one. The soup kitchen has expanded. So has the sandwich menu on wheels. The face mask, a reminder of the last calamity that now belongs to a distant era. Lives reduced to their most basic needs, and always that question, for what? Alexei, Tatiana and their children are from Kharkiv, 600 miles from here.
Как шахматная доска разбомбили.
Но они бомбят с неба, и цивильных, и всех подряд. Надо закрыть небо. Потому что они иначе, если бы закрыли небо, они бы уже отстали.
No wonder they left Kharkiv. This is one of the neighborhoods of Ukraine's second city, but this was no earthquake. And nor was this. Russian bombs did this. And this at the supermarket. And this was no comet, but a Russian plane being shot out of the sky. And this was no welcoming committee, but the unflinching citizens of Chaplinka in the south of Ukraine greeting their Russian conquerors with insults. Go home, they said. Go home. The anger is rising, fed by the sheer outrage of these uninvited imposters and their killing machines. Here the Russian soldiers are shooting in the air, but when will they level their guns? No one can fault the Ukrainians their spirit and gumption, or indeed their sense of humour, as dark as the current circumstances. This is a Ukrainian roadblock. The atmosphere is tense. The car's occupants look worried. How will this end? In soupy music, it turns out, and the marriage proposal. Love in a time of war and hate. Well, earlier I spoke to Alexander Rodnyansky, an advisor to President Zelensky, and I began by asking him if he shared the president's fury at the West and at NATO over their refusal to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
We do agree. All of Ukraine agrees with that. We believe that a confrontation one way or another with Russia is inevitable, and the sooner the West realizes this, the better. These regimes don't just disappear by themselves. Now, what I also want to stress at this point is that Russia has been consistently exploiting the fact that the West is transparent and honest about its actions. At the same time, it's just been lying about every single issue over the years. We've heard that there was no troops on Crimea. Next day, there were Russian troops on Crimea. We heard there was not going to be an invasion on the 20th of February. Then a couple of days later, there is an invasion. So you can't just give Russia that advantage of being transparent. At this point, we have to enforce a no-fly zone one way or another if you want this conflict to end sooner rather than later.
When Vladimir Putin threatens with nuclear weapons, though, which he's virtually done in the last week, is that also a bluff, or does he mean it?
Hard to say. So far, everything he's been saying eventually turned out to be true. So no, everybody thought it would be a bluff that he would move into Ukraine with a full-scale invasion, but it turned out to be true. So I think we should take this seriously, but also figure out how we respond to this, not just with dialogue, because dialogue is what the Russian regime likes to exploit, but also with the credible military response, perhaps, or a threat of a credible military response.
But it's the threat of the nuclear deterrent being used. That is the thing that has really concentrated Western minds, isn't it? Because people in Berlin or London or Washington are just not prepared to roll the dice on this one.
Well, that will mean that the costs will rise, and at some point when they will be prepared to roll the dice, it will be later and more costly. We have to understand, Russia may threaten nuclear war also, but doesn't mean that it will use it at the same time. So whenever they feel weakness, whenever they feel that the West just sits back and looks at what happens in Ukraine, they will push for more. And so we have to stop them from doing that.
So on the nuclear front, you're saying that we should call his bluff?
Well, at this point, I think we have no choice. So you can say that we're not enforcing a no-fly zone, but at the same time, give us all the capabilities that we need to effectively enforce a no-fly zone.
You're getting thousands of extra Stinger missiles and anti-tank Javelin missiles and so on. Do you think that with the equipment that the West is now ploughing into Ukraine, you can turn this war around? You could win this conflict?
So at the moment, if you look at what's happening, it doesn't look like Russia is winning at all, right? So the pressure is on them. They've failed in terms of all of their strategic objectives. They haven't captured any big cities that they wanted to. If anything, we are winning, and of course we can win.
If they're not going to impose a no-fly zone, the West that is, do you think that at least they should impose oil and gas sanctions against Russia? Because at the moment, the price of oil and gas is just shooting up as this crisis goes on, and they can just make more money to finance the war.
At this point, everybody should seriously think about and implement an oil and gas embargo for Russia. I know that's hard for the West to do, but I really think that the price of peace and stability at the sort of, it's worth paying given the price of peace and stability.
You said just now that you think that Russia is losing this war, but if the fortunes turn round for them, are there any circumstances under which you could imagine suing for peace? I don't know, a partition of the country, or slicing off eastern Ukraine and the Donbass region and saying to Russia, that'll be yours now. Can you envisage anything like that at all?
Well, look, I mean, this is what Russia has been trying to achieve all along. We're not willing to compromise on our sovereignty. So no, there's not going to be any slicing or dicing of Ukraine. That's completely off the table. But we are obviously interested in long-run peace and stability in the region and peace with Russia. But the solution to that lies in Russia, right? The only reason we are having this crisis, the main reason, is because Russia is a repressive authoritarian dictatorship at this point. And that's what happens when you have dictatorships. They go to war with other peaceful nations. True democracies don't go to war with each other.